So I'm Harvey Rosenthal, and I am the CEO here, and I am a person in long-term recovery. And I heard about the movement from Ed Knight. This is when I was director of a clubhouse, and this was in the, I'd say, mid-'80s. And Ed then introduced me to Ron Bassman, who introduced me to NARPA, National Association of Rights Protection and Advocacy, and alternatives. And then the world opened up, and I met all kinds of good people. So we're going to go down. We're going to give each of these people 5 minutes, these heroes, 5 minutes to talk about their story and their relationship to the movement. And, either, from the very beginning and as it went down. We have the new movement, and we have folks that were around at the beginning. And I'm just holding the mic. So here's Gayle Bluebird, one of the very first in the movement. This is a very precious opportunity for you.
Well, first of all, I'm here. And I say that because I wasn't going to be here because I do have some physical problems that I decided, okay, I could handle while I'm here. So here I am, and glad to be here. I related to, what's her name? Oh yeah, let's see. What's Hopkins' name? I mean, the one that just said the. Pat, yeah. So Pat Deegan talked about a roar that we all have. I want to say that I really started off with a whisper, but I was there at the time when the early movement began, which was in the 70s, probably 73, 74. At that time, people were very angry, outraged. There were small groups of people that began to meet and developed and shared their stories. And they all had similar stories. They had been involuntarily committed. They had been shock treated or secluded and restrained. They were used as unpaid labor, and they witnessed deaths that they knew had been caused by drugs and not by natural causes. What I notice is I've been involved with the movement in terms of the arts. And if you go back and look at what happened at the demonstrations, that were very, very artistic, very, the signs were very reflective of the issues. So one of them said, I'd rather be sane with the truth than mad with lies. Another one said, wait, Jolt not. I have a memory problem. I'm 82. Anyway, the signs were all very prolific and colorful. The slogans, one of them was, am I doing that? 1, 2, 3, 4. We don't want your drugs no more. 5, 6, 7, 8. Smash the therapeutic state. Those two things were part of the main priorities, which is being totally opposed to the mental health system. They wanted to abolish it. They did not want anything to do with the mental health system, with funding, which became an issue later. And they all had very similar experiences and were against pretty much every part of the mental health system. There were a lot of demonstrations. Here I was, a very misfit actually to the movement. Number one, I had not been hospitalized. That was one of the criteria for belonging to the movement. I had not been hospitalized. That was one of the criteria. And two, I had been part of the the medical movement, the clinical movement. I was an RN, I was a registered nurse working on a psychiatric hospital at Herrick Hospital. Is that better? Maybe? Um, But there's a term that came up recently called deep hanging out, which I really kind of liked. And that's what I started doing. Somebody introduced me to the movement. I was very much diagnosable, was diagnosed, and had been in a alternative treatment program that was supposed to be reparenting. So my experience had been one of being part of a abusive, very abusive alternative. So I experienced homeless and a lot of the same things, but except I really wasn't part of who they were, at least not initially. But what did happen is that I became useful to them. They had a list of shock doctors. One of them was Dr. Rubenstein, who was at Herrick Hospital. And I provided them, I was working there at the time as a nurse. I provided them with the name of a young man who had not given consent. So there was a demonstration held at Herrick Hospital where everybody was outside chanting and singing, and I'm going up the long steps to the door and going to the nurses' meeting, knowing that I had caused the demonstration. Now, their impression of what was going on was that these were just a bunch of crazies. They had no idea or understanding or even interested in why they might have been there. So that was kind of interesting. There was another demonstration that I was at that I think that Pat also mentioned was that there was a 30-day sleep-in, which at that time Governor Jerry Brown allowed us to sleep in sleeping bags in the hallways. Two of the leaders, which were known to be the founders, was Wade Hudson and Leonard Frank. So they made some demands. There were some changes. Over the period of time, I've been known for the arts. And I can see that there's a future that the arts will have a prominent role. I have some ideas for that. I've been sharing them with Harvey. Performance, books. We have several people that have just written books. One of them is here, Michael Skinner. And performance. Really wish I could tell you about Howie the Harp and go through some of it, what his performance was about. But I think I'm about over. I do have a table. Please come by and let's talk further. And I'm sorry about the beginning. That's kind of hard. But anyway, okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Gayle. We'll have a second round to say more about it. Another really incredible hero of the movement is my friend Laura Van Tosh. I met Laura some time ago. She came to our conference very early. And Laura, you may not remember this, but you worked for a managed care plan. And I think someone asked you, it might have been me, can there be recovery, as delivered by a managed care plan? And you said no. And I thought that was so brave. And that's the way you've been really throughout. You've always been a truth teller. And you've really always been very clear and very honest. And I would like to turn the mic over to you.
Laura, you are up.
Thank you. Your voice is kind of faint, but I heard my name, so I realized that I'm up. Thank you so much, Shannon, and thank you, Harvey, for that introduction. I do remember that visit quite well. It was a challenge during those times, actually, to recognize that no matter what format we were working in, whether it's managed care or local peer support or state government, that the question about recovery was always prevalent, making us remember that whatever we're working on and wherever we happen to be, that recovery is central. So I appreciate that memory from long ago and appreciate being with you all virtually. anyhow, in the few minutes that I have, I'll introduce myself. I'm Laura Van Tosh. I'm wearing a black shirt with eyeglasses, kind of shoulder-length hair. And I'm also a peer in recovery for many years since I was 17. I've been a patient, an ex-patient in the behavioral health care sector. I'm now consulting on a limited basis, but I call myself in semi-retirement. I'm no longer working full-time, but I'm working on things that I'm very happy to be doing, including the coordination of the Mental Health Policy Roundtable, which brings together veterans of the policy field, experts in the policy field, together with newcomers, people like legislative aides, people like peer support specialists working at an entry level, newcomers to the behavioral health care, even if one has left and to retire to come back to work in the workforce, and everyone under the same kind of umbrella during approximately quarterly meetings that are now virtual. And the roundtable is designed to help transfer knowledge from one group to the next with a series of speakers and a moderated dialogue with an expert moderator that I've asked to work with me over the last several years. And again, this is now a virtual setting. The roundtable was started 25 years ago this year in Washington, D.C., where I used to live and work. And we traveled around the city and met in conference rooms throughout the city. And now, as I mentioned, we're now virtual, coming from Seattle, Washington, by the way. And there's a YouTube channel that, if I can, I'll put it in the chat when we're finished, where you can watch previous roundtables that are now being stored on YouTube, which you might find helpful. My first experience with the movement, excuse me, occurred when I was a inpatient, and nobody really called it a movement. I certainly didn't know what that meant at the time. I was 17 years old during my first hospitalization, but got wind of people making change in the field several years later when I learned that there was a conference call occurring sponsored by Judy Chamberlain, one of our founders in the field of peer support. And she was working out of Boston, Massachusetts at the Center for Psychiatric Rehabilitation, where they helped to organize monthly conference calls. And this was all telephone, no email, etc. And I learned about all the people around the country. I think Gayle was involved. Some other people in today's panel probably may have heard about these calls that we had, really as a way to provide peer support. But what I gathered from those calls that I participated in was the wealth of knowledge and expertise that was emerging from this movement, where people were creating alternative programs and services for people like me, for whom the traditional mental health system was not as effective as these alternatives, or so we thought. And luckily, several years later, some research was able to be conducted at the beginning of our movement. Excuse me, having the ability to look at our services from a research perspective that showed how effective the work that we were providing had on people with behavioral health care issues. I happen to have been a director of an early peer-run program called Project AVES, Outreach, Advocacy, and Training Services for people who are homeless and mentally disabled, a street outreach program, the first ever funded by the National Institute of Mental Health. And that program ran through a 3-year demonstration period. And then we were able to get permanent funding from the state of Pennsylvania, where the where the street outreach program was based in Philadelphia. And that was the first work that I ever did as part of the peer movement. It was one of the best positions I ever had, working shoulder to shoulder with other peers who had been homeless and who had mental illness, who were now on staff, coordinating and working street outreach 7 days a week. Not quite 24 hours a day, but close to it, and having an impact on the city of Philadelphia's street outreach program at large. I think in today's challenging world, to sum up quickly my comments, is how do we maintain the expertise that we've been able to dedicate to the peer-run movement? How can we be sure that our services are funded, that workers are paid a livable wage, and that our research could show the strong effectiveness of the work that we do provide? So I look forward to continuing to listen. Hopefully people can speak up just a tiny bit and I can hear you. Thank you, Harvey, for bringing me in to this important dialogue.
Thank you, Laura. That was really helpful. Up that for Laura. A real movement story. I'm going to ask you to say one more thing, Laura. Will you talk about Howie the Harp? I found a picture this morning of you and Howie the Harp. Could you say a word about him?
Absolutely. In the same vein as mentioning Judy, by the way, Howie was, if Judy was the mother of the movement, and there were several mothers, by the way, I have to admit, Howie the Harp would be the father, or in some places, the grandfather of the peer mental health movement, like similar to Justin Dart, who's the father of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Howie the Harp clearly laid a framework, a strong framework down, almost like a set of train tracks across the country, basically from New York City, where he was born, all the way to Oakland, California, where he ran a center called the Oakland Independent Support Center, OISC, for many years in Oakland, where he also worked together with Sally Zinman, another movement leader from way back. They together were an incredible duo. And Howie the Harp really just kind of pulled down the barriers that we had in the fields about, the amazing potential that peers have in terms of working and contributing and advocating. He was a strong activist, but also an incredible mentor in terms of how he brought people along in the work that he did, how many people were impacted by him. He was kind of like a lovable bear. He was kind of a large person, but if you felt like you wanted to give you a hug, it would be the best hug in the world that you ever got from anybody. And people listened to him. And I think that he tried really hard to have our movement come together on a variety of issues. And he himself was very outspoken to try and get us to work together and make change in our field. He died when he was 42. And I think he carried with him his harmonica of the harp is a slang term for harmonica, and he played the harmonica so well, with such class and soul. And that's all I have to say right now about Howie. He's definitely missed. He was like a brother to me.
Thank you, Laura. Well, I want to introduce, I would say, a younger, a more modern part of the movement. These next three people have taken the mantle from the people you've heard and are really the movement, our leaders right now. And here's Chacku Mathai to start the conversation.
Thank you, Harvey. So, hi everyone. My name's Chacku Mathai. He, him are my pronouns, and I'm someone that, got to be part of the movement and be, I would say, raised by the movement from a very young age. Started, I'll just start with the kind of the emergence in that story, part of my story, after a suicide attempt, was in hospital, and I'm Indian, and my family being, we're kind of like the first peoples, indigenous people of India in particular. And so that our healing practices are very different than Western medical practices, and Ayurveda and other kinds of practices were really more of how we operated. So one of the struggles immediately, and this was 1985 at that particular time, was the way in which the system was trying to make recommendations for care and the way I was being treated there and the recommendations for me there versus how we would have done things, So my experience was really my family pulling me out of services, out of the hospital, rejecting, in fact, trying to run away actually and hide me. They were trying to go back to, I'm born in Kuwait, go back to Kuwait or go back to India. And we were kind of talked into staying anyway. And then, we were still rejecting all of the medications and services and supports, but then eventually ended up accepting an outpatient care support. But that didn't happen on its own. It happened because my father was talking with another person, and he basically said to this other person, say, yeah, my son's in the hospital. He just tried to kill himself. He's on drugs. He's on the street. I can't quite figure out what to do. He won't trust us. He doesn't, believe we're trying to help him. And this father said, me too. His son was also struggling and going through a similar thing. And he had just left his job, took a medical leave, and renovated this old barn, I guess, across from a high school in Rochester, and renovated it and gave it to the teens that were going through similar things, including his son. And so he said, maybe your son will come and meet those kids, And my dad said maybe, and so he brought me over there. And it was by meeting these other young people who, for the most part, didn't look like me, talk like me, sound like me, act like me, anything like that. But there was one common denominator in that we had all been through a very series of hospitalizations or services or experiences that the families didn't feel like they could support on their own, And they really supported each other, and they introduced me to all kinds of things. And also, in this space, they started to kind of go, that program they're trying to get you to go to, if you use your voice, it may not be so bad. So all the things that, Bluebird and Laura and others had done up to this point had actually made it possible for them to even say something like that. If you use your voice, it might be all right. That wasn't true for many of our services, including some of the ones that I had started to engage. So now that's 15, 16, by 17, I'm diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. I'm still struggling. I'm hearing voices. I'm going through all these issues. My parents still aren't figuring out how to trust me. I can't trust them. I feel like there's just so many divides, right? Yet, the opportunity that one psychologist introduced me to, he said, well, did you know about this Mental Patients Liberation Alliance? And it's run by this guy, George Ebert, and introduced me to them. And then started showing me papers from other people. And there was a group of us that were doing some things like running peer support meetings. They would come up to me. They weren't called peer support meetings at the time. They were just kind of self-help meetings, we call them. But one of them came up to me and said, a therapist at this one unit said, can you come and do a presentation to some of the kids in our unit? And I said, okay, but I don't know what I'm doing. I just got here, that kind of thing. And she said, no, don't worry about it. They're gonna relate to you. So that's what I did. I went up to this place. There were a bunch of kids, about 8 years old to 13 years old, in a locked unit, and they were kind of the ones that were constantly being taken down and in restraints and struggling like I was. And I just told a little bit of my story, asked a couple questions, and we started talking. Afterwards, the therapist was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they talked as much as they did. They've never done that before. Can you come back and do that again? And I said, well, maybe, on one condition. And she said, what's that? I said, well, we'd like you to leave the room. And she said, "Oh, well, I can't do that." I said, "Well, then I don't think I can do it here, but we can figure something out, outside." And then she said, "Well, why? Why did you need me to leave the room?" And I said, "Well, I don't know if you noticed, but every time we spoke, for the most part, we looked at you first, and we were trying to decide whether you could handle what we had to say. And most of the time, the answer was no, you couldn't. So we were speaking in code. We were talking, but we weren't really telling you out loud what we were saying, because then you would have pushed a button, you know? So we need to be able to say what's really on our minds in order to heal, is what I was saying to her. And, we started to find spaces for that. I started to do that in residential facilities, in the psych center. That was a adolescent unit at a particular facility in Rochester. And we just started trying to create pockets, what eventually became pockets of resistance, locally. But at the time, it was really just pockets of support, and that's why that peer support that Pat talked about, being at the intersection of love and outrage, I think is pretty important, because we were recognizing people didn't even like getting us the opportunity to get angry. Like, in other words, you can't tell them that because they'll get mad. Well, yeah, well, they're already mad. Like, we're already mad. You're just hearing it now. You know what I mean? We're already upset. We're just calling out the racism. We're just calling out the struggle. We're calling out the psychiatric oppression. These kinds of issues were still happening. We were just now naming it more directly. And so the permission, and then I found out there were people getting on buses and going to Albany. And then I was like, who's doing that? And this guy, Dave King in Rochester, kind of was organizing the first bus coming out. And there was a psychosocial club called Operation Friendship, and I'm kind of telling some of these early stories of upstate because sometimes you don't hear them. And Dave was this kind of very charismatic dude, wore this like unicolor suit and was just cowboy hat and just my kind of guy. Like, that's totally not mainstream. I had long hair down to my, waist, and I was not like looking for conformists. I was looking for abolitionists, and Dave attracted me to that bus. I told a bunch of other people, hey, let's get on that bus and go to Albany. We were making change in the city, in Rochester, but we weren't necessarily doing it statewide. So that's how I got to see Harvey in action. And I'll see this guy at the top of the steps, and I just couldn't believe what was possible. They were doing something called the Reinvestment Act, where they were going to close the state psychiatric centers, take that money, and reinvest it into the community. And I hadn't even known that was like something that was possible, and some of my friends didn't know. And we were, I had a friend named Thor, and I asked, why is his name Thor? Well, it's because he takes Thorazine. You know what I mean? Like, this was how we were named. These were our nicknames. I was Too Shy, and then I was Ziz because I mumbled. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't necessarily reflective of who we were as people and what we could do. So, I'll just kind of, I'm kind of going off on the local kind of thing in the early, 80s and 90s. And then at that time is that Reinvestment Act, that 90s period, there were more allies in government actually making the recovery concept something that was part of policy, something like the Community Reinvestment Act. So there were more opportunities. So one of those administrators came to my peer support meeting and said, hey, we're doing this psychiatric rehabilitation training, and we were wondering if you might be interested in being a trainer. And I said, well, sure. I got nothing else going on. My dad had even started a business just to give me a job. I mean, like, I was not feeling very employable at the time. You know what I mean? So I was like, okay, I'll try that, but can you tell me why you're asking me? And she's like, yeah, no one else wants to do it. And someone told us you might. And I said, why doesn't anybody else want to do it? Well, they think this whole thing is like a fad and false hope, and this recovery stuff isn't really going to make a difference. And so we can't make anything happen. So maybe you can help us with that. So I became one of the first kind of psychiatric rehabilitation trainers. So I just found vehicles at that time. They weren't necessarily movement vehicles as I would have wanted. Like, we still had to have those, but now we had to double up, which was some of the traps that Gayle and Bluebird was just talking about, which is, do you take the money? Do you not? Do you what part of this? I was doing the presentations called The Problems with PACT, because at the time, PACT was the ACT programs of assertive community treatment, they were being rolled out as the hospitals without walls, the way in which to force people into care. And, NAMI organizations were trying to increase forced treatment. And I was going around to various NAMI groups in the local area doing those presentations on these transparencies, and trying to help people see something different. And anyway, long story short, those kinds of initiatives led the way for us to, meet more of our group and have the conferences like this one. That's when I started to come to NIAPR's conferences and meet, some of those people, and we're going to do more later,
Yeah,
right? So I didn't mean to hold
The
up.
question will be, how does the movement manifesting itself?
Yeah,
now in this
yeah.
environment?
Sorry if I took too much time. Okay. All right. You want to go with
No, no.
the introduction? Okay. Cherene.
You can take as much time as you need. Hello, everybody. It's great to be here and it's great to see you. My name is Cherene Caraco, and the fact that I'm even considered a part of this contemporary movement is nothing short of awe and gratitude, because like everybody's talked, I came into this very honestly. And one of the honest pieces is the people we've been talking about so far today, Pat Deegan and Judy Chamberlain and Celia Brown and Howard the Harp and Laura Van Tosh, my good dear friend, and Gayle and Chacku and Harvey. Like, all these people literally saved my life. I didn't know it at the time that I would meet them and be a part of this, but you all really saved my life. So just a couple things. I came into mental health systems when I was decently young. I was around 12 or 13. And I have to say this with a caveat because I have no childhood memories. And so my memories don't start until I'm like 20 years old. And so I'll share the couple that I do have, but I have a lot of feelings and a lot of sensing about what happened at that point in my childhood and about my life. But I can't tell it to you like memories because that was erased a long time ago for me. But I remember coming into mental health systems and receiving my first mental health diagnosis when I was around 12, 13, not realizing by the time I was 16, I would have at least 4 mental health diagnoses. By 19, probably at least 6. In my 20s, added 2 or 3 more, right? I said at one point that I'm in the running for being the most diagnosed person in the world because I am an overachiever. So my first mental health diagnosis is a lot of experience that we've talked about today. And that was this doom, this prophecy of you are sick and you are broken and you'll always be sick and broken, and everything I couldn't do and everything I'll always do and I will never do. I'll never be able to live out of hospitals, and I'll always be dependent upon this and that. So I was given those messages from a really young age. And, the unfortunate thing is I reflect, and now I've been doing this work for 32 years. And as I reflect back, how terrible that was to me, my spirit, my soul, my identity, because I believed it. I believed it for a really long time. I'm kind of known somewhat as a disruptor today, but I will tell you, I started out very compliant. And the more compliant I became, not only the smaller I got, but the sicker I got. Instead of seeing my behavior through the lens of trauma and asking the right questions and really seeing me, my behavior was seen through the lens of pathology and symptoms and illness. And with that came all of the things that comes with being a mental patient, right? And so until I was about 19, I was a really good mental patient. I did everything that I was told to do until I was being hospitalized against my will. And there was something inside me, that little rebellion still existed, where I was like, get the fuck out of here, run, right? It was very powerful, it was very strong, and it was, you need to flee, because everything that's coming next, you thought your childhood was bad, this is about to be horrendous. And I figured out that there was a loophole in the system. And I was in college, and that if number one, I evaded the IVC, but I also, if I changed my major to psychology, I could start working in the psychiatric hospital that I was supposed to be hospitalized in. So I was 19, working at the psychiatric hospital, absolutely shocked that this is what they thought would be helpful to any human being, let alone me. And there was something inside me that just caught fire, that I said, this is not okay. To do this to us is not okay, right? Nobody wanted to be there, but people that work there didn't even want to be there. And this is what they call treatment. And I started understanding treatment is trauma. Unfortunately for me, that was the case. Treatment was trauma. And I had to walk away from it in order to find my voice. And that's what I did. And I started reading. I read about Laura Van Tosh and Ed Knight and Judy Chamberlain and Celia Brown and Howie the Harp. And I got to meet Chacku, 21 years ago when I just had a dream, I think, for doing this work. And I got to meet Harvey about 20 years ago. But that fire never went out. It was really important for me to right the wrongs that had been done to me and is continually being done to others. At this point, I used it to start our first completely standalone peer-run organization in my state of North Carolina, where we are both innovating and disrupting at the same time. And I can certainly share a little bit more if you want me to do that. But we are constantly finding ways to either reform really crappy systems, to abolish pieces that need to be abolished, and at all times to find alternatives so at least we have a choice of not participating in harmful things. The long and short of it is now for a living, I live at that intersection between love and outrage. I work at the intersection between love and outrage. We say the word love around where I work all the time because for me, I have to have the love of people that I will never meet. And I have to love them so deeply that I'm unwilling to tolerate the ways in which I was harmed and the ways in which they may be harmed or are harmed. And so the outrage still fuels me. And I just translate that into, if this shitty stuff doesn't have alternative options, then we're stuck with either having no support or being involved in things that feel really traumatic and harmful.
Thank you, Cherene.
I always admire the things that everyone on this panel has to say, honestly. And I guess in terms of like how I got started in the movement, it started really as a teenager. Actually, I would even go further back because I think what brought me here has to do a lot with my mother, my family. My mom immigrated to the United States from the Caribbean before I was born and became a citizen when I was 4 years old. And she was with a man who was fleeing authoritarian Cuba and wanted me to have opportunity and for our family to have opportunity. And I think in a lot of ways, when my family was trying to see how they could support me and what I needed, the support, or like as Pat Deegan was saying, the help wasn't helpful. It was harmful. So I think thinking about where I grew up in central Massachusetts in project housing, with a metal door that had dents from bullets in it, in a neighborhood with a lot of gun violence. And I ended up struggling with hearing voices, seeing things, thoughts and feelings of suicide, and ended up being labeled with schizoaffective disorder. My mom didn't really know what to do with me. At one point, she called 911 and I was wrestling the phone out of her hand. And I ended up on a psychiatric acute unit, UMass 8 East is what they call it in Central Mass. I ended up in the state hospital shortly after that for a year. And the horror of the things that I saw in there, I was like, no one deserves this. No one deserves this. There was one young adult that I'm thinking about in the state hospital who's an autistic person, couldn't really vocalize what they needed, kept basically saying, I need to go to the bathroom, I need to go to the bathroom, I need to go to the bathroom to staff. And I distinctly remember the staff saying, like, hold on a second, until they were really annoyed by him. They actually ended up restraining him and kicking him in the face. So after those profound experiences and the medications that I was put on and starting to speak out about the atrocities that were happening in the state institution, I was determined. I'm going to get out of here and I'm going to do something about this. I wasn't sure what yet. I was an artist at the time. I was like, maybe it's creativity, maybe it's creative expression and just sharing a message of a world beyond all of this, a world beyond punishment, a world beyond a lot of these things. I ended up, I was involved with there's a Worcester Arts Council in Massachusetts. They ended up being like, well, how about doing art at like mental health programs? And at first, like at the time, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that sounds great. Like I would love to give back to people like me and really share a message of my story and talk about these things. I did not know about the peer support movement at the time. I did not know about any of these things. I wish I had peer support when I was in the state hospital. I wish I had it at any point in the community after that. And I eventually stumbled upon it through this. And I found the recovery learning communities. Ended up doing an art show for Central Mass Recovery Learning Community, ended up learning about peer support, going to peer support groups. And through that time, I was like, oh, I can share my experience with hearing voices. I can share the fact that I want to die and you're not going to call the police. That's fucking rad. So let's go. and that really brought me further in. It wasn't until I was trained as a certified peer specialist later until I found out that there was movement history, right? There was an entire fight in the wake of the horrible things that had happened in institutions and continued to happening that led to this point. I ended up protesting outside of institutions like the Judge Rottenberg Center, which has been, protested against for many years and has been labeled as a violent institution by the United Nations in Canton, Massachusetts. I ended up protesting against the Boston Globe when there was a series that came out called The Desperate and the Dead. I talked to the editors and I said, this is unacceptable. You're describing us like these violent people that are running through the streets and we're going to do horrible things. And through my experience in protesting outside of institutions and doing some of this work, I was like, how do I get in further? Like what can I do? I ended up working as a peer bridger. I started coming back into the same institutions that I was hospitalized in, running into some of the same security at the Worcester State Hospital, the staff that recognized me there as a patient. They were like, they really let you in here? Yeah, they did. And through that, it was some of the only non-psychiatric peer support groups being facilitated in those spaces. People gaining ideas of hope, the momentum really built. I think from there, the real driving force for me was during my certified peer specialist training, learning about Madness Network News, the consumer survivor, ex-patient, and ex-inmate movement, and the work that had been done. I was like, there's a civil rights movement behind this. No one describes mental health care broadly as having any connection to a civil rights movement. Why is that? And I think that question made me kind of press forward. And that's why I'm here where I am today, is really those experiences brought me here. Thank you.
So Vesper, I've known you for a while and I've seen the love, but now I just saw the outrage. And I really appreciate that. And that's what this part of it is now, the movement. What does the movement do now in this climate with all the oppression that's here and coming? This idea of, I've thought about sort of going to the New York Post and surrounding it. I didn't know others had thought about that. It's a great idea. But, I would say, what has the movement got to say now in this environment when the chips are down? We have this history. We know we have to fight. We've had to fight all the way through to get to here. But now it's going the other way. And it's scary. So I'll start with you, Vesper, because you were on a roll.
Well, I want to also say that there's so many generations past me, like younger folks who are very inspired to do something about this. But I think it's about how do we channel a lot of that energy? How do we continue to work with communities? I think Pat was talking a little bit about it earlier and touched upon it. It is local organizing. And I think in your county, in your town, going to your town meetings, seeing what the mood and the idea is of people who struggle with emotional distress. Like, what does it look like? And having honest conversations about what you think that town might need, which is community-based alternatives to incarcerating institutions. There's so much work that's being done. I can say right now with my work with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, my work with the Disability Rights Education Defense Fund, my work with the Bazelon Center for Mental Health Law, there's at least 15 lawsuits against this federal administration. I've signed on to many of them. I'm pushing, and there's an immense effort to push at that level. But the local level has self-governance. So continuing to push and promote these ideas and do what we can in every space that we can is going to be critical. I think thinking about how we can move together in a kind of human rights focused way that is often when folks might be at the table that do not agree with you, kind of thinking about it as human rights are nonpartisan. Like my basic needs, your basic needs, that doesn't necessarily need to conflate with what political party you're a part of or what these things look like, because there's so much there that I think gets in the way. Thank you. And I'd say the last thing is look out for privatization of public funds in your county and in your area. I've seen small pharmaceutical companies, large pharmaceutical companies, many different companies arising in different states that are trying to stop residential treatment programs in areas, trying to stop the funding for community-based initiatives so they can test new drugs. And the market is ripe for it, so people will try to push it. So I'd say keep an eye out for that, organize, and make sure your community is on board and knows about what you're doing.
Cherene, you talked about being a disruptor in the service area. Could you talk about that and anything else? But I think what you've done with services is to turn them around.
Yeah, we all have to find our space in this work and this effort, and Pat said it really beautifully about finding our roar. And for some of us, it's policy spaces. For some of us, it is going to protest, being involved in legal action. Some of us, it's direct support of each other as human beings. Some of it is collective organizing and building collective wisdom. Like, there's so many ways that we can show up. And I believe that there's no wrong way to show up. It's just what you are either led to do, the wisdom that you feel like you can share, and a way that fuels you, that does not take from you. Because one of the things I've learned about all of this is, to use a sports analogy, this is a long game. If we think we're going to get into this in a short period of time and see big changes, systems are more dysfunctional than we are as human beings, and they take longer to recover. That is just the absolute truth that I've seen over doing this for a really long period of time. And so if we want to create change, understand that it's going to take a little while for us to see the change that we are wanting to. The space one of the spaces that I found for me is because I've worked in mental health systems for so long. I learned the language, I learned the culture, I learned how they're funded, I learned how people are trained, I learned how the system is designed. And, I'm kind of like a code switcher, quite honestly. I'm a translator. So I have to go between multiple communities and translate things into real human being, human rights language in a way that can be heard. And so on the service side, when I'm able to do it, you okay? Yeah, I know you're moved, I can tell. On the service side, what I'm able to do is understand how these services are designed, what they're not designed for, which is they're never designed by us, for us, or with us. And what it does is it leaves behind not gaps and not cracks, it leaves chasms. For those of us that have really complex life experiences, the Vespers and the Chackus and the Cherenes and the Lauras that were told we would never, or fell through every crack that there possibly was. We have people that are falling through chasms more than I've ever seen before. Who is going to be there to design what people will show up for, that is affirming, that is actual help that doesn't feel like harm, that is designing around the healing, not around the pathology? And what does that look like? And so what we do is we are in community, getting out of the way and listening to what people are saying does not exist. And then we're leveraging our privilege, our relationships, our resources to then make it happen. Take an idea, a vision, and turn it into reality. For us, that's turned into, we now operate 26 programs at my organization. And with every single one of them, it was because there was a chasm that somebody said, we need this for our community. And all we did was show up and say, you tell people what you want, our job is to make it happen. Is that what you were asking for? Yeah.
I want to turn this to Chacku, but I want to tell a story. We're coming down this way. Early on in the way I knew Chacku, I got a call from him saying, this happened, and it was in the newspaper, a young man was burned to death. I think he had an intellectual...
He was one of us. No.
Oh, was he one of us? So Chacku called, and he was doing a demonstration, and I went out there, and here's what I found.
Oh, you want me to tell that story?
Yeah, well, just for a second. You got more
Oh,
to say.
okay. Yeah.
I
That's.
just found that to be so moving.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming, first of all. I mean, one of those, what we did was when this young man, I don't know if you remember, but Matthew Shepard was also killed that same month. And it was, both tragedies, hit our community hard. And, what we did was organize rallies around the whole state. I think, we had one in Buffalo, we had one in Rochester, we had one in Albany, in the city. People were doing different versions, but it was all about challenging the discrimination and the attacks against us, as people with psychiatric histories. And so this issue of the young man was that, they were, because he had a psychiatric history, they were basically they ruled his death a suicide. And he was even still alive in the hospital testifying to what happened, and they still didn't believe him. And the sheriff still called it a suicide when it was a homicide, a brutal one. And so that kind of violence against us was not new to us. This wasn't the first story of us, but when we organized that, it was a rainy day in downtown Rochester, and we organized families. People, my parents came, and we had people, those of us who were all part of the movement in that local area, come forward and tell our stories, and we didn't get the press. Largely, because, importantly, Matthew Shepard was also getting press, But I think the opportunity to bring our community together locally has been, I think I want to resonate with that point over and over and over again. Local action in this time is what makes it real for people, right? So this idea that this happened to us, this happened in our town, this happened in our community. So fast forward to, only 5 years ago, unfortunately, so this had continued to happen even 10 years prior to that. A friend of mine died in jail by suicide. As far as they were concerned, as far as I was concerned, it was more than that because he was in jail unjustly, And so these kinds of issues were going on. But anyway, back to 5 years ago, Daniel Prude was killed by police in Rochester after a behavioral health incident, and a call from his brother. And so that call, that video, that was the same year as George Floyd, same month. He was actually killed in March 2020. And we didn't see the video, the body cam footage, until September 2020. And that's when we were immediately in the streets. A group organized immediately, and we were called Free the People Rock. And, this idea of bringing our community together across healing justice movements and lineages was still an idea at that point. It hadn't quite happened, at least in my town, until that moment. We have advocates here, who are protesting in those streets. Majid Round, I'm glad you're here. The idea that people who didn't normally align themselves or identify themselves with ex-patient movement, but we're part of Black and brown movements, we're part of LGBT movements, we're part, what I'm saying? Like these kind of healing justice lineages, we're now connecting and recognizing hip-hop, starting to recognize the parallels between the emergence of trauma and our response to it in a really, incredible way. So now we're together, right? You know what I'm saying? Like we're actually bridging, and we are an abolitionist organization. We're, like we're bringing those ideas into action on the local streets. So, we'll have another workshop on that, on the Daniels Law side of things, but that's an example, I guess, Harvey. I don't know if that's what you're referring to, but yeah, okay.
Well, what you don't know is when that happened, one of the first people in the street was Chacku Mathai. Well, one of the very first. And for that reason, you got an award from the Bazelon Center, was the Advocate of the Year, if I remember. Not that year, but soon thereafter. And, that's an incredible campaign you'll talk more about. But, that was really, again, the movement from the street inside the Capitol, in the back offices, in the commissioner's office, is an important story. So Laura, you can take this where you want to, but I've watched you do so much work sort of locally. That seems to be becoming a theme in Seattle and in your state. So you can talk about that or whatever else you'd like, but it's your turn.
Well, I just want to say I really appreciate hearing Chacku. We don't really ever get a chance to all sit together and just chat. So listening to Cherene is mind-blowing. Listening to Chacku is mind-blowing. I love stories. So I love hearing you telling your own stories, which are really exciting and amazing. And I'm sure, I don't know how many people are in the room right now that are listening, but all of you have stories too. So I hope maybe in 5 or 10 years, you'll be up at the front of the room talking about your story with other people as well. The more we talk about what we've done, the more opportunities I think we have for incredible work that many of us are just scratching the surface at this point. I want to also just acknowledge, I didn't know Chacku got an award like that from the Bazelon Center so many years ago, but really almost every year now the Bazelon Center is giving that award. And I think peers have been particularly honored by the Bazelon Center. I know Cherene received Innovator of the Year. Harvey and I each also Lifetime Achievement in Advocacy, and so on. And also Harris Myrick just received Advocate of the Year award from the Bazelon Center. So I just want to recognize that luckily many of us are getting recognized, and it's kind of high time. And so many of the other national organizations that don't focus necessarily day by day on peer issues are seeing an example set by the Bazelon Center. Maybe some of them, I know the National Council, Mental Health America, a couple of the others have, specific kinds of awards for peers, but we really need to recognize that being recognized really helps propel our movement. I also want to acknowledge Larry Fricks, who is really the founder of the peer specialist position in our behavioral health care system. He created the first peer support specialist that could bill Medicaid out of the state of Georgia. And he passed away a couple of years ago, earlier this year actually, and there's going to be a celebration of life. And there's a really amazing obituary covering all of Larry's accomplishments. There'll be a celebration of life at the Carter Center on November 3rd. So I thought if anybody's interested, just reach out to me and I can send you the information about that particular event honoring Larry Fricks. I plan on attending, by the way, and I'm hopeful that other people in the peer world might be able to go down to Atlanta for this particular acknowledgement of really an amazing peer in our movement, Larry Fricks. In terms of just some local issues that I want to just bring up in general, we have a kind of hot election season here in Seattle and King County. King County surrounds Seattle, so it's a large urban county with obviously one of the largest cities in the middle, which is Seattle. And we have a county executive position that is up for grabs. There's 2 county council members competing for that particular role. County executive is sort of like a mayor of a large area, which includes 32 cities within the county. I happen to be working on one of their campaigns. Very excited about the future. Our current county executive moved on to another role in transportation. So we have a brand new opportunity after 12 years of having one county executive that ran unopposed all those terms, and now a very competitive race for that particular position. Also city council races, very excited about 2 or 3 of those races. I'm also chipping in where I can, volunteering where I can on all of those races right now. And I have to tell you that our local political scene is really important for me to be involved, because behavioral health care and homelessness are really on the ballot. And I really encourage people to look at opportunities to get involved locally and even statewide on political races. I think our future is being able to not only speak out and support good candidates, but quite frankly, to run for some offices along the way. There are a few peers that have actually put their hat in the ring for local races. I support them no matter what party they're in, because I really believe that peers can be incredible leaders in the political domain, and that we have so much to offer, especially given what's happening with Medicaid and so on. So that's my kind of pitch. It's a little possibly off target a little bit, Harvey, but definitely at the top of my agenda. And it's actually a lot of fun to be involved in those settings, getting a chance to meet new people. I've spoken out on behavioral health care issues at house parties and other venues where people can speak openly, and people have been very receptive to those issues, especially nowadays, given budget and other kinds of social issues facing all of them.
Thank you. I'm just really moved by how everyone here said no to the system, to the pain, rejected it, insisted on creating something different, came together both in self-help groups, but on the streets, in the elections, at the election sort of booths. And I'm really moved by the fact that we're being guided not just to fight in Washington or with Congress, but every day in a way that's very visible and local, and something we can do. We're still trying to figure out what we can do about that. Gayle, you want to say a couple of words? You'll be the closer.
Well, okay. So what I want to say is that I'm at the end of the spectrum. I'm the older person. And many of the people that I worked with over the years are no longer with us. And I think that what was meaningful for me was to have all of them as family, and I miss them. And I think of the importance of our being close to each other. So we can do all of these things. I think what was important to me that I learned over the years was the need for people to have closeness. I learned a lot about working with people in the psychiatric hospitals, and I took a lot of risks. a lot of those risks really had to do with how much people needed somebody to care about them. And how much people needed to sometimes just be quiet and to be with them. Communication, I think, was very important, was something that I learned. I think, well, I want to say something that somebody we're missing is Jackie McKinney, who was the first person who was a person of color who entered our movement at Alternatives years ago. I think we have other recognitions also of people of color that we are maybe forgetting about. They're not as much visible in our movement as much as they had been. I think I wonder about where our movement is going, and I think about people that are involved in communities and involved in wars and people in Gaza. And who are these people going to be? Who are these people that are in ICE right now? Or how is that going to affect them emotionally? What are we going to do in the future to care about people? Also want to say something about seniors. Now I'm a senior living in, I was in a residential community. I'm in, I was in a big high-rise residential community. And people really didn't talk about their past as having a mental illness or a psychiatric history. But as you got to know them, you found out that a lot of people did have those experiences. And so that a lot of times there was a bonding between us that really had nothing to do with those past histories, because here we were all having in common physical illnesses, physical disabilities, the need to find leisure and things to do and to be with each other. So what I discovered and I took a big part in the residence that I was recently in, organizing creative activities. We had a coloring group. Now that may sound silly. I always thought coloring was not something that I felt was real creative. Not inwardly creative, but it was a very positive, popular group. And part of that had to do with conversation. Books. I just want to say something about books. We have somebody in our country, Megan Caughey, maybe you know that name. She's written a book. Right now I can't say the name of that book, but remember her name, Megan Caughey, who's an amazing artist. Her book has just gotten another series of awards about her experiences in many hospitalizations, as many people have talked about. She was one person who probably had 100 hospitalizations. So I think that the sharing of our stories, I think that to me is the power of our movement. I think the power of the arts is part of, and combining wellness with the arts. So thank you for being here and listening, and thank you for being my friend. Thank you. Oh, wait a minute. Can you give me your key, your cane?
Are you going to hit me with it?
Yeah, no, I'm not going to. I'm going to stand up if I can stand up.
Sure.
I had really wanted to talk about Howie the Harp, but and I could give you a lot of the quotes, but because he wasn't just a hero in all the different ways that Laura talked about. He was our hero in the arts as well, and he emceed our talent shows. He had people, playing music after our talent shows. He was very, very well known for the arts. So one of the things that he did always when he was the MC was to, some of you may know this, he would hold his cane up and he would say, "What am I doing?" Anybody know the answer? Raising Cain. All right, so I want you all to participate in this. What are we doing? Raising Cain. What am I doing? Raising Cain. All right, thank you.
All right, everybody gets 30 seconds. Go.
Oh. You go.
I think in a tireless effort and at times where things can seem so stressful, don't lose your capacity for hope. Lean into your community, and yeah, we need each other.
Ditto, ditto, ditto. The fight is not even close to being over in many ways. It's actually just beginning, and we need to show up together individually more than now than ever. And I agree, there's actually a lot to work toward, and there's a lot of vision that we still have yet to create together.
And that was like 10 seconds each. All right. When someone asked me, Luke asked me earlier today, how I was feeling about this, I was actually feeling pretty mixed because I was going through what Bluebird was still talking about, which is just feeling the losses of our mentors and leaders, in the last several, years alone, much less, further, And I was, I'm still kind of grieving those losses personally and finding myself struggling with how I am showing up, even as a person in the movement, and am I doing it right? Am I doing it enough? Am I doing, all of those questions? And those were the people that I would talk to figure that out, And so that's been harder. So I guess, the analogy I was using was this snake analogy where I was saying it feels like, I'm constantly, got my guard up and, and it's kind of like growing a skin, but then I'm constantly learning how to shed it, and get vulnerable and like get to where Bluebird was talking about and where you were talking about, Cherene, with the love and really, be connected as a family. And that takes work. It takes letting go of things and takes, forgiveness, all these different aspects of who we need to kind of model a little bit. And I need to work on how I model that for the, as a movement and in the community so that the community responds to us that way. That's it. Thanks.
A quickie fight. We've got to fight. There's 2 plenaries on fighting. There'll be one tomorrow called Fighting for Our Rights as if our life depended on it. And then on Wednesday, there'll be a one also about fighting back against what's happening in Washington. Laura, you got 30 seconds.
30 seconds on what do we do next?
Oh, I think we need to keep this conversation going, in whatever ways we can. Zoom conferences, have all of us come together. I think one of the really important things too is we've got to be rid of our silos. I hear that a lot in the provider community, that silos are really driving people out and away. And I think that our peer movement runs the risk of creating and maintaining silos when I think we can be doing so much together. I really like this session today. This is one great example of coming together, and I personally want to acknowledge all of my fellow presenters. I've learned so much from you and feel grateful to be able to present alongside you, even virtually, so that we can keep the conversation moving along. Thank you, Harvey, too, for making this happen.
Thank you, Laura. 30 seconds to raise cane. One last time.
I start and finish, right? I could have finished later with the cane, but anyway. One of the things that to finish is expanding our peer support, expanding what peer support can do, integrating into the different settings that we already have integrated into. I'd also like to think that one of the things in society is that nobody knows who we are. And friends that I encounter in all different settings have no idea that this movement exists or what peer support is or what that means. So I would say that being who we are, where we are, loving ourselves, and being everywhere and communing love and care with other people from our own perspective.
So I want to thank my friends and family here for your words. Very moving to me anyway. I hope to you. I want to thank Laura because she said to me, If you're the moderator, you can't talk. They have to talk. You're probably lucky that happened. So thank you very much for coming.